Jedd Fisch's coaching staff is complete.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hansen, the site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thanks for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers today. We're going to talk about the junior day. We've seen so many new visitors start to officially put their name on that list, talk about how important that's going to be for what I know you've talked about could be a top 15, top 20 class. I certainly agree with you there. We're going to talk about Cameron Foster, the veteran agent who's coming on as Washington's director of contracts and cap management. Really interesting story there, and just really shows what Washington is doing to stay ahead in this world of modern college athletics. So we'll get into that. But Lars, the on-field coaching staff is complete for Jedd Fisch, with somebody who everything you and I have heard is a really solid recruiter in Brian Odom, who spent some time at Oklahoma, at USC, and most recently was at North Texas.
Yeah, a very much Robert Balla type hire where it's mid-February, and you're talking about a guy who has multiple stops in Power 4 conferences. You know, Missouri, Oklahoma, go way back to when he first started out at Arizona back in 2011. And I think he's been at UNT in North Texas for last
just
3 or 4 years.
Oh, just the one. Yeah.
I was gonna say. So it's like when you look at guys that go down those type of levels, like it's not bad because that gives you Texas presence, and then that's something else that you look at from the recruiting side of things. Where okay, cool, he's got SEC experience, he's got Big 12 experience because Oklahoma wasn't in the SEC at that point, and so you look at it and say that's a solid hire. Now again, how does it fit with Ryan Walters because there's no total familiarity there? Like, and there's some, and I think there's
there is. Yeah, they were at Missouri at the same time.
And that's but I'm saying, like, aside from that stop, like there's not like he wasn't like a multiple like how Jedd
Sure.
has taken everybody where he's been at. But I do like the hire in terms of if Robert Balla was able to succeed like that, I have no doubts that Brian Odom can do the exact same thing, if not more.
So I absolutely agree with you. Another thing on top of that, he has coached 3 NFL players. That was all during his time at Oklahoma. Kenneth Murray was picked in the first round, and then he had 2 guys picked in the second and third round, respectively, in 2022. So he's got a little bit of the development under his belt, and I went back and I did the math because I was really curious about this. During his 5 years between Alex Grinch defenses, which I have to specify, between Alex Grinch defenses at Oklahoma and at USC, between the transfer portal and high school classes, he was able to grab 6 4-star recruits. A couple of them were transfers, Easton Mascarenas Arnold being one that I really liked, who went from Oregon State to USC last season. And there are some things that you certainly can look at and say, oh, well, the defenses he coached on weren't great, so, linebacker play, Kenneth Murray being the one that stands out to me. Like, yeah, it's the numbers were certainly going to be a little bit inflated there at a certain point in time. But I look at everything he was able to do for some of those guys during his time at Oklahoma, and it looks like he did a really good job developing some of them. I don't think that carried over to USC, but I was honestly not a huge fan of a lot of the defensive talent that he had at USC to work with. So I think that there's a lot to prove, in my opinion, where he's got a great set of position players to work with here. When you think about what the top of that room is going to look like this season with Buda Al-Ukta and Exree Alexander, and then, Jacob Manu, whatever happens there is kind of what happens. And then a blank canvas in a bunch of talented true freshmen in Zajas Reina-Saleh, in Jonathan Epperson, and Donovan Robinson. So I look at all that and I say, I think that there is certainly a lot of potential here where you look at, keeping Wasil Alobi in the boat. That's a really nice get for the 26th class, and whatever else might happen to the linebacker position. But then, going forward and trying to continue to recruit high-level linebackers year in and year out, because that is going to be absolutely critical in Big Ten play. I think that he has all the potential to be a really strong hire, but I kind of want to see it on the field too.
Oh, that's a more than fair expectation. Like I'm not saying he's going to guaranteed, light the world on
Absolutely.
fire, be a Broyles Award winner and all those sorts of things. But I do think he's certainly got the resume that you mentioned. And then I'm glad, we kind of you're detailing the USC experience the way that it is, because it's worth the context where you look at USC's defense and it's like, not exactly that great. But, is it on the coordinator? Is it on the other assistant coaches? Is it kind of just say, you know what? let's just kind of all parties break apart here. Everybody see if they can go prove themselves elsewhere. And he did a decent job in North Texas too. So you're thinking about that and thinking, okay, you can kind of develop talent anywhere. And I loved your reference of the Sopranos reference of, whatever happened there. Whatever happened there. That's great little deep cut there. But in terms of Zadrius Training-Saleh, in terms of Jonathan Epperson and some young guys as well. So you have multiple guys in that room, not just the experienced transfers that you brought in, to where you can sell it and say, hey, well, Zadrius committed to Robert Rollin. Now, is he going to transfer in the spring? No, obviously not. But I'm not that was ever a case. But I'm thinking that's why this hire was so imperative, to get somebody with experience and not just say, hey, you know what, we're going to promote, another analyst or, whatever that. Not that I didn't like the Grant O'Brien idea, but this is a solid veteran hire. Absolutely. I mean, I know when Pete Thamel put the report out there on I think Saturday night or Saturday afternoon, it was veteran coach. And that's what it's one of those buzzwords that does get overused a little bit too much. But I think in the context of this, when you're talking about giving Ryan Walters another shot in this progression, fresh start as a DC, all those sorts of things in a new area that he's not familiar with, having somebody that did coach on the West Coast at USC plus has some Texas ties can kind of mend the whole map together, since some of the staff has kind of more East Coast ties.
So I think that's a really great point, and it brings in the last thing that we should probably talk about when it comes to this, since now the on-field staff, or the true on-field staff, right, is complete. What are the 10 assistants that are going to go on the road? What's that going to look like? Or just the rest of that staff? Because we know it'll be Jedd Fisch, and on offense, doesn't seem like any of those guys are going to be left at home. So the question is it going to be Aaron Van Horn, who's the one guy who, no disrespect, obviously, but just as the odd man out for the time being, where it's, hey, this is your first position coach job. And, it's something I know I wrote about it over on Huskies Wire. I think we talked about it on the show as well. Aaron Van Horn was big in the recruiting originally of Christian Thatcher. And Christian Thatcher told me last season, 4-star linebacker, obviously, who ended up going to Utah, that he was a huge fan of what Aaron Van Horn was able to bring to the table as a recruiter. Said he'd been recruiting him since his freshman year, and he developed a really tight bond with him, and spoke very, very highly of him. So I'm really curious if, you don't bring in a veteran coach like Brian Odom to say, all right, we want you to sit on the sideline, because the only other possibility there would be Taylor Mays. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's the route you go as well. It's not necessarily my preference here, but I think about that and I say, if he's going to be somebody who's going to be critical in local recruiting, right? Hey, all these local guys are coming on a decent amount of unofficial visits anyway. So, you could try to find a way to, I don't want to say game the system, but take advantage of the rules the way they have been written right now. So I want to throw that out there as a theory.
Yeah, I just have a hard world envisioning where Taylor doesn't make an impact on the recruiting trail. It's just one of I was actually thinking about this, and this is kind of how twisted inside my life is, but I was thinking about when Tosh LaPoy first was going off at Cal, Cal alum, and then ends up coming to Washington with the whole Stark and the boat thing. I feel like Taylor Mays is almost like a better version of Tosh, where it's like, hey, he's a recruiter. Not that he can't coach. I think he'll be a better coach in that respect. But it really seems like that's the type of hire. No, this is the hire where he's going to be our recruiter. He is going to, go all over the place. And the reason why I say that is at the press conference saying we're in the Huskies hat. And there's no slight at him. This is not saying he can't be an on-field coach, similar to Hawkins, right? Where it's not just because you're a good recruiter, but it's those type of guys where you can go to Florida one day and you can be in Texas the next, and you can be in New Jersey 2 days from now. And that's what Taylor Mays brings you, because he's got that Seattle presence, got the young youth ability, doesn't necessarily have the coaching pedigree yet, but that's why you come work for Jedd Fisch. And that's why you hire an experienced linebacker coaching Barry Odom and say, you know what, we're also going to have you on the recruiting trail, but we're going to have a little more seasoned coaching, versus where Mays is like more so of the 80-20 recruiter at this point in time.
Lars, there are also plenty of reasons why you hire somebody to manage the salary cap, which we'll get to right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three. I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use. And when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So, Lars, this was a very interesting hire where we got nice late news dump on Thursday of Marcus Griffin getting hired, the assistant offensive line quarterback coach is being hired. And then Friday, we get there's a salary cap management director of contracts coming in, a veteran agent, Cameron Foster. Now, a little bit of background on Cameron Foster for the everydayers who might not have seen this or heard about him very much. A UW alum who has been an agent for a very long time at this point, represented everyone from Napoleon Kaufman to Vita Vea, Caleb McGarry, a whole bunch of guys in between, worked with Steinberg Sports for a little while. And now he's going to be, this is not just a football hire. We're going to talk about it mainly in the sense of football because that's, where all the money is and where all the money comes in, everything like that. But this is an overall athletics hire. And I love this. This is a great example of UW just saying we need to find a way to stay on the cutting edge of what's happening. Pat Chun said as much in the press release after they officially announced the hire on Friday. And this is really smart for a whole bunch of reasons, and it's going to be very beneficial to the university.
Yeah, I was glad. Okay, so now it all makes sense because I'm so glad you said the Steinberg Sports because that was before the show. I was like, you know what? I feel like I've seen him around campus. I feel like I've seen this guy. Like this is not a random just because having Mike Tannenbaum is good. That's kind of an external. It's good to have external and internal. But the fact that you also highlighted, this is an all athletics hire. This isn't just for Jedd Fisch in the football program. Obviously, football carries the weight, it carries the break, carries the day. It is the driver of this whole thing. But it is a good thing for the university to just have anybody for basketball, for teen Langley women's basketball, for softball, whatever you want to call it, whatever sport is involved in this. Because theoretically all the sports are. And I think that'll help everything in terms of the athletics where it's like, okay, you're not just saying, you're going to put Pat in that situation. Say, hey, the director of athletics is only giving, this, women's whatever this much. And it's like, wait a minute, let's see if we can't massage it a little bit more. And I think that's why having somebody with outside experience is a good time. So
there are two things that I want to mention here. The first one is you and I talked about this the other day, where we said, hey, if there's an internal promotion for this, for a similar position for the football team in particular, we wouldn't be surprised because it plays into the second thing I wanted to talk about, where you can't hire Mike Tannenbaum and the 33rd team to do all of this. Where one of the things that Jedd Fisch said when you asked him about this during his December press conference was, we wanted somebody who the players can also consult with on, financial decisions, on different things like that. And you're not going to be able to do that for everybody. So having somebody who is going to be able to be in the room as a revenue share negotiator is really helpful, and somebody who can help say, all right, we know this is the revenue sharing salary cap for the football team, for the basketball team, for softball, all these teams. That's really important because we know there are going to be third-party NIL deals. We know, Michael Penix, when he got his Adidas, his Sharpie, all those other deals that they did over the course of 2023 seasons, those don't fall under this. Those are their own independent entity where you don't have to, budget for that per se. So having somebody who says, okay, whoever, like all these incoming redshirt freshmen that haven't seen the field yet, we know they're not going to get the same amount of deals that the star quarterback is with, Damon Williams, Jonah Coleman, Denzel Boston. I almost said Michael Penix again. Moving forward, they're not going to get those same kinds of deals just yet, but we still need to make sure that we keep them on the roster, keep them happy, and make sure they are compensated well enough for where we think that they're going to be. That's all a very, very important part of this. So having somebody who can do all that under the scope of the university, since a lot of this had been third party previously, is very important and a really smart move.
And I don't know how much you know about Steinberg Sports, but like Lee Steinberg is one of the originals. Like I know everybody talks about Drew Rosenhaus down in Miami, but like Show Me the Money, Jerry Maguire, based on Lee Steinberg, like he was the original one in that operation. And so from that perspective, it's good to have somebody, an impartial agent, almost like a third party, where it's, hey, I've experienced negotiating contracts in the NFL. I can explain to you, hey, like maybe let's structure it like this so we can help on the back end. Anyways, it takes it out of Jedd's hands. It takes it out of Pat's hands. It takes it out of Tannenbaum's. And it offers the players a great resource, which is, again, another reason why Jedd Fisch came to Washington. He couldn't make this hire at Arizona. Flat out, bar none, full stop, end of sentence. Like that, all these hires, but especially this one, that's not the type of move Arizona's making. That's not the type of move every program is making. Washington is clearly being one of those programs on the forefront, as you mentioned to start this thing off, where, okay, we have a major media market in Seattle. We have all these companies. We have all this sort of stuff here. We got the external people. Let's make sure we still have our in-house bases covered, because now that some of these deals, and eventually when the house settlement, whatever that thing gets taken care of, and all those things, whenever this can all come in-house, you already have the people on the books. It's similar to, Chris Peterson starting off Motley Futures way back when it was, hey, like, we're going to just, like, let's get the structure, let's get the foundation, another buzzword from Jedd Fisch. Let's get the foundation in so that when this thing really kicks off, we don't have to react. We can keep rolling. We can adjust.
Exactly.
And we have somebody who has, and I can't stress enough. Like, if you're connected with Steinberg Sports, you know how to design contracts, how to rep guys professionally, how to do all these things on the up and up. And I think that's a perfect situation for the university to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of want to just shout out Vita Vea's contract here for a minute as one of those examples. Signed just not too long after the Super Bowl, signs a 4-year, $72 million extension. That's a really great deal for him. It's a great deal for the Tampa Bay. And it's different things like that, where I just use that as an example of just work that he has done as a representative of Vita Vea. So I'm really curious to see what this is going to look like, because it's something where the more this shapes up, you talk about the house settlement, where it feels like in April, May, June sort of thing, is when we'll probably know a little bit more. So we can't sit here and act like, hey, this is what we think is going to happen, because things in this world of college football are always changing. There are always new things coming along. So the fact that you're just saying that Pat Chun, this athletic department, is saying no matter what happens, no matter what that ends up being, because in the press release that we received, that's online for anybody who wants to go read it, they said was done in preparation for that. Exactly as you said, Lars. It was all done in preparation to make sure that we know exactly what to do, exactly how to proceed, and that we are prepared for all of this moving into the 2025-26 season. So moving forward, this could be a really crucial thing where, if we look at some other programs around the country, we saw it. We saw it last season at UNLV, how that played out, where, hey, this part of my, my contract or my NIL agreement was not fulfilled, so I'm not playing anymore. When you have somebody in place to handle that's not an issue that's going to come up. And you and I have talked about this off air. That was never something that you and I really thought would happen at Washington. We see things in the comments all the time like, oh, would this person consider transferring for more money? Would this person consider that? From people we've talked to, obviously it's always going to be a case-by-case basis, but having somebody in place to handle this and know what's going to happen and know what stuff like that is going to look like makes it a whole lot easier.
Yeah, I mean, the name that came to mind when you were saying all that was Brian Parham. But my point is that also the other name that came to mind, the situation that came to mind, was Xavier Lucas, where, if you're going to have certain, hurdles come up, it's good to have separate entity aside from the head coach, aside from the athletic director, aside from the agent, somebody tied directly into it. And the fact that he's a former agent. So, we're talking about Darren Hittner and the Xavier Lucas thing going to Miami. Having an agent is so imperative. And it's especially when that's why I'm going to keep emphasizing Steinberg Sports, because that's such a reputable agency. It's not the only one, but it's one of those that's been around for decades and decades and decades. So they've seen the evolution of contracts. So you're not going to get gypped in the same way as if you went out and, no offense to some of these new agents popping up, but let's be real. If you're just popping up in this NIL market, it's like, okay, like, let's see the end game here versus somebody who's been around decades and decades and decades in the sport. You can't replace that.
Sure. And it's one of those things where, I think a decent way to wrap this conversation up is, as more of these, agents do pop up, or they're NIL agents, they're agents for this, agents for that, having just different go-betweens instead of, like, it's something we see in baseball all the time, and, salary arbitration negotiations, where there are things that can certainly fracture relationships on that part. And I'm not saying that there's anything behind that. I'm just saying that salary negotiations, especially when you talk about arbitration in particular, when that certainly seems like something that's going to be a part of this, where, somebody who is the director of salary cap management might say, hey, yeah, we, just making an example here, starting left tackle, we think you're worth this. And, oh, well, I'm hearing I can get this on the open market. Yeah, but we don't think you played up to that standard. We're willing to offer you this for the next season. Those are things that can certainly fracture relationships and cause problems and force kids into the transfer portal, which, before anybody can even drop anything down in the comments, we understand what that looks like in the world of college football. It's weird. It's different. It's confusing. It is, because it's something we haven't seen before. But having somebody to go between that and say, all right, well, here, we can just finding a way to make a deal and find some middle ground is really important in all this, because that's not something you can say everywhere right now. So knowing that that's something that Washington has in the bag could honestly be something you can use on the recruiting trail, because Lars, Junior Day, March 8th, that's going to be a huge day. So Lars, as we keep going here, we've seen more players start to confirm that they're going to be at Washington's Junior Day on March 8th. One of my favorite prospects in this class, 4-star running back Brian Bonner Jr. is going to be among them. Is there any one guy that stands out to you that, we've talked about this over the last couple of weeks that's going to be on campus?
Well, so I'm going to pick up right with Bonner, because there's so many names popping up. But I think it really does seem like he's the running back who has emerged. Obviously, I have Scotty Graham. We've talked about it, at length on the show, where there's plenty of running backs that are going to be in contention for that second spot. Obviously, you still have Hansen. He'll be up, I believe, as well on that weekend. All the guys that are committed, it seems like they're going to be up on that weekend. So even Ensu Tafe, right? Because he said he would be back up on that week, even though he's not. Yeah,
Ensu Tafe will be here. Yeah.
But he's not committed. He's still another guy to be in there. And I think it just really speaks to, this is kind of what we thought would happen last year. It was like, hey, you have all this potential to get 4-star talent. You got a decent amount of it last year. Didn't get a ton, as maybe as much as we thought. This really seems like the class where they're going to load up even more so. And I think that speaks to, if you can get Brian Bonner on campus one more time after March 8th, that to me will be, can you follow the Brady Smigel plan? Can you get him back on campus again? Because I know Blair Agula had it in his story where he's like, it's going to be a real interesting recruitment in an April, May, June, July window for him, for Brian Bonner. And I think that to me is if you can make an impression early on, that might sway some things down the road.
So I agree with you. And I not to push back on your point or on Blair's point, but I think they already have, because how many, and again, it's just, I want to add on here, because how many times are you going to say, oh, all right, we already have a 4-star back in this class who, at the time of his commitment was a top 100 player in the country, already committed, and you're still willing to bring this guy on campus. And obviously, with everything we've seen from Ansu Sonoe, he seems more than on board with all that. He's recruiting everybody he possibly can be when you look at his social media page. Seems very passionate about everything going on at Washington. So I like that. I think that's really cool. Just a cool thing to mention in terms of all of this, because it's something you and I have talked about ad nauseum. I was on, shout out to the Sound the Siren podcast, went on there last week, and we talked about it for a while. The thunder and lightning combination that Scotty Graham absolutely adores, because that's exactly what this is. And I don't think we need to spend too much more time on running backs, but I just want to make sure that that's emphasized, because Brian Bonner is, you and I talked about on the show a couple weeks ago, getting a top 100 recruit. Brian Bonner is number 100. So getting somebody like that in the boat is still something that can really move the needle towards you as you try to continue to pick up momentum on the recruiting trail, and show that to Derek Coleman-Brusa, who said he wants to be part of a top recruiting class, to Brady Smigel, who said he wants to recruit a bunch of top guys to come in around him, to Simone Catalonga, to whoever else you like down in California, whether it be Mark Bowman, whether it be Tommy Tofi, Sam Utu, you can, the list goes on and on. Anthony Jones being another one who's going to be on campus. Showing all those guys, hey, we can make an impact despite already having top players committed, and we can truly start stacking classes. That's when this program is at its best in total, because we saw that in 18, 19, 20, what stacking classes looks like.
Exactly. And I think Jedd, more than anybody, is going to understand that being an NFL guy, where, in the NFL, just like we're talking about a salary cap, by the end of your third, fourth year in the league, that first contract is coming up. Do you go give them the big money, or do you go and chase some new guys? In the case of high school recruiting, every year it's a little bit different, because you want to stack that talent. You need to have 4-star after 4-star, because you're not looking at hey, he might run me off, especially your running back. But there's, so many other guys we could probably talk about where the defensive side of the ball to me is kind of where I'm going to be intrigued to see tying this whole thing together. there's several linebackers that are in play on the West Coast and in the 26 class in general. How quickly can Brian Odom start to dive into some of those relationships and kind of start to make things work in that regard? Because as we talked about with him as a recruiter, it's one thing to, have him say, hey, come meet these guys, like almost like kind of what USC did, where it's like, hey, we're going to have all these underclassmen and junior days and incoming seniors meet the new coaching staff and these sorts of things, which I don't think it's a bad idea, but you want to kind of have a little more of a running start. And so getting him hired this past weekend will now allow him to have some relationship building in the next 2 weeks before those guys get on campus. And I'll be curious to see if there's anybody that he's, maybe targeted, in the 26 class that, or had his eye on a USC where he knew he couldn't get him down in North Texas, but now he can say, hey, you know what? Come to Washington with me and Ryan Walters. Maybe we can cook some things.
So I'm really interested in that as well, because the defense is like we talked about on this show so many times. I know I keep saying that, but it's because these things are really, really important. We talked about like linebacker. Stacking that is really important, especially coming off such a good year in terms of recruiting linebackers between high school and the transfer portal, but stacking talent just in the front seven in general. Because I look at it and, I mentioned Anthony Jones a minute ago. Watching what that recruitment is going to play out is really interesting, because it really feels like it's going to come down to UW and Tennessee. And he said as much to 247 Sports a couple of weeks ago after a visit to Tennessee that they were in the top spot right now, but he's coming up to Washington on March 8th. He's going to set up an official visit for some point in the summer, and getting 2 visits out of him is going to be really important because, you talk about stacking that and building that defensive class. Anthony Jones is one of those guys where, he doesn't have the same level of interest as Simone Katawanga. I think they're both very, very talented players, but one of them, with Katawanga's ability to play inside, and with that size and that frame, he's going to be just a little bit more sought after. And if you can find a way to get Anthony Jones in this class and just say because he's not, I don't want to say he's the cornerstone, because obviously that'd be Derek Coleman-Brusa if you're able to get him. But having somebody like that is just such a solid building block to have in this class. And you can play off that and continue to sell, hey, we're bringing in elite talent, just like at linebacker, where you've got, Donovan Robinson, who you and I are really high on, plus the pair of in-state 4-stars, where if you're able to build that talent along the defensive line, just all of a sudden this front seven could completely transform and become one of the better ones in the Big Ten with the talent we've seen at linebacker.
Yeah, and then you pair that with what Taylor May said at the press conference about, hey, hopefully the O'Day tie is coming handy. And I think having all those sorts of things work together, where that's what we've been talking about, where, yes, you have premium in-state talent that you need to make sure you can secure. But in the same point, you do also need to go outside the state, because as much as we love recruiting in the state of Washington, you need to go secure California. You need to go secure some guys from Texas. And then if you happen to sprinkle in some guys from the South, so be it. But this is where I'll be intrigued to see, how many of these guys that, it's the one thing that you remember talking to Scotty Graham back in late July, early August, when they had the luau at the lake. That was very impactful for a lot of guys, because you had commits come up, like when Julian McMahon came up and was able to, his parents and, other parents are able to interact and say, hey, what made you come up? Now you have Brian, like bring it back to Brian Bonner, where it's like, okay, Andrew Snow can say, hey, why did you commit? And he points at Scotty Graham, and then Brian Bonner's like, that's a good point. It's a good point. And then he points at Jonah, and then he points at Adam Muhammad, and then he points at, himself. And you kind of just go down the line, DJ Wiley at Arizona, and all the names that you could add to that list. And it's just getting more FaceTime around those coaches with the new staff. And I don't know about you, but it really did seem like a Jedd's press conference. Like, he does seem a lot more settled in, where he's not.
I agree.
It's not as much of like, hey, trying to get the message out there. It's like, you know what? Our message is pretty solid. Now we're just going to let the message simmer and cook. And when we get these guys back on campus, we can maybe start to sell a little more. But I don't think you have to do as much selling anymore, because now the proof is in the pudding. And now you just kind of got to get the year in and year out talent to stack it. That's where he has to prove it in that regard. But in terms of you were able to prove it on the field, like, hey, Jonah, 1,000-yard runner. Denzel Boston, one of the best receivers in the Big Ten. Payton, it is what it is. Offensive line, we need help. You just go down the positions and everything sets up perfectly for the 26 class.
So I agree with everything you said outside of one part, and I'm going to start there. And that was where you said he doesn't need to sell anymore. That's more of I think he needs to sell harder than he did last year, because the window is there, right? And because that window is DeMond Williams. And if you're able to sell a little bit harder and, find a way to close on to bring up another elite California prospect, Devon Benjamin at defensive back, if you're able to close on whatever wide receiver you would say is sitting at the top of your board right now, one name who I absolutely just love in terms of the talent that he brings is Sinai Thomas from Archbishop Reardon in San Francisco, where if you're able to close on a guy like that, you're able to close on some of these other top talents, whoever it is that you want to say at the top of your board, you have to sell harder because you say, look at what kind of window we're in. You watch the Sun Bowl because you're interested in watching it. You watch Damon Williams do everything. Is that not somebody you want to play for? We want you to come play for this guy. We need you to commit. And that's where because everything else said is perfect. He is absolutely more settled in. And I think that makes that pitch a little bit easier because last year it wasn't, just that he hasn't played a game at Washington. It was, we're building a foundation. We've got this guy that we really like. Hey, you're going to love watching Damon Williams. He's going to be really good. Oh, we got Adam Muhammad. We really like him. Denzel Boston is going to be a big piece for us. We think, that's a guy we're going to point to and say, hey, he's a star. But you hadn't seen that yet. And everything else you said, now that you've seen Jonah run for 1,000 yards, now that you've seen Denzel Boston lead the Big Ten in touchdowns for the first half of the year, and then, fall off after that, not due to any fault of his own, just in terms of the defense they were playing. I say that just to bring up our preseason prediction of him leading the Big Ten in touchdowns. But now that it's all there, you can really put the pedal to the metal and say, look at everything we have, look at everything we've done. Our window is wide open. We have everything we need. And now, we like to play young guys, if you're, one of these top prospects and you prove that you can get on the field, we will play you. You have all of that opportunity in front of you right now.
Okay, so I completely agree. I guess it's more semantics and just in terms of it won't feel like a sell. It'll be more or less like, hey, believe in my concept. Like, it's more of like, hey, you know what? It's not a hard sell. It's not a salesman sell. It's like, you don't want to play in the offense? You don't want to do it? It's almost like, hey, like,
sure.
I get exactly. It's like the reasons are there to be sold. You don't have to sell me anymore. You don't have to convince me Damon is good. You don't have to convince me your offense works here. You don't have to convince me. The only thing that is left to be proven is, can Ryan Walters do it at UW? That is, I think, the only. But that's out of Jedd's hands. That's not on Jedd.
No, that's completely fair. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all every day for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, or there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell, so never miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please, if it's 5-star reviews, it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Tuesday.